Welcome to Standard Deviation.
Are you ready? Is it recording?
It's recording.
Hey, everybody.
Hey,
How's it
Kevin.
going? Trying some poses today.
You look very nice.
Well, thank you. It's because I shaved my bard.
Yeah.
Or shaved my beard, to those of you who don't speak the language I just made up. You look nice as well.
Hey, thanks.
You're welcome.
I also shaved my bard.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Gross.
Actually, to be honest, like, ever since I hit 30, I get these chin hairs, and I have to pluck them, like, every other day.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you could grow a bard.
I don't know if it'd be a bard, but I often think, I actually want to tell someone, and it might as well be you, if I ever go into a coma, can you make sure, like, someone keeps plucking
I'll
them?
just pull the plug.
Because I don't want to wake up and have, like, a little patch, because I think that's what it'd be. It'd be kind of a weird, scraggly patch.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Unless you're super old, and then I think it's fine. I mean, like if you're like 80 plus when you're in this coma.
Yeah, but if I'm still doing it, like, I don't.
Ah, fair enough.
You know?
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah, I remember asking my mom. I was like, "Did you start getting like chin hairs as you get older?" And she was like, "Oh yeah."
Wow.
Yeah.
I guess it's sort of a resource allocation thing. If you're still plucking them when you're 80, then you go into a coma. It really just depends on the state of society, I think. But
well, I'm just saying, if someone is regularly visiting me, like, bring some tweezers.
let's talk about some other
ask.
aging stuff. I'm gray. See?
Yeah, I got
a bit.
I got a little bit of gray.
This started in my 20s.
Someone just pointed out to me like a few months ago that I have a few, because usually it's kind of right on your temples is pretty common.
I wouldn't
I have a
know
few strands.
because I'm bald.
True.
I went bald pretty early. I think I was like 19 when it well,
19,
not when it
yeah.
started, but when it was like obvious, you know. So I just started shaving it, and then I started shaving it for real by like 25, I think.
All guys should do that if they go bald.
Yeah, I think so. It works.
That looks so much better.
Yeah, and in my case, I actually look a lot better without hair than I did with hair. And I think that's mostly because I had like 3 different textures in 3 different spots on my head, so I never had a haircut that looked quite right. Mm-hmm. Some of them were almost quite right, but none of them really would. None of them really pulled it off, you know.
Mm.
I did have nice hair though. It would bleach blonde in the sun.
Aw.
Yeah, and it looked like I had highlights though, which is ironically kind of a downside because it looked good, but then people kept asking me about highlights and why I got highlights, and I was like, I didn't get highlights, you know. I'm just beautiful. Anyway, let's talk about the pandemic that we're experiencing. What is it? It's April 13th, 2020.
Yeah, this is only our 4th episode talking about the pandemic, but
yeah.
You know what? What else is there to talk about?
Nothing at all.
Nothing at all.
So I've been, for those of you who have heard or seen the last few episodes, I've been talking about some of the stuff that I'm keeping an eye on in terms of trying to identify KPIs or red flags for an impending societal collapse.
What's KPI?
Key Performance Indicator.
Okay.
Yeah, so KPIs are one of those data buzzwords that's, I mean, I have a nuanced stance on buzzwords, but I support them overall. Anyway, it's usually like like a KPI for a company could be like sales figures or revenue or something.
Okay.
It's like the key data points that you look at to see how things are doing.
Makes sense.
Yeah, and I've been speculating that some potential KPIs are things like frequency and duration of outages of basic utilities and services like power, water, internet, food, that kind of thing. And I don't have a bunch of historical data to compare things to, but at the very least, I'm seeing some signs of food outages at this point. The meat industry in particular is raising some alarms. The largest pork producer, I think, in the world, Smithfield, just shut down a South Dakota plant that apparently is pretty significant, and they're warning that we're on the verge of a food shortage in the old U.S. of A. And that's concerning.
I'm wincing right now for those of us not watching.
Yeah. And another one that I was talking about was Postal Service. I've been hypothesizing that the internet and or power grid will falter to such a degree that digital communication will no longer be reliable to the extent that it even is now. And then we'll probably rely more on things like postal mail and maybe even federalize FedEx and UPS. But now I'm seeing that the post office is freaking out because they're on the verge of shutting down, begging Trump for cash to keep the doors open, and he's apparently directed his staff to refuse help the post office. At least at this point, that might change.
So how does a pandemic affect the post office that way, or even the pork place for that matter?
I mean, well, the pork place, it was because in that case, in South Dakota, somehow that plant had half of South Dakota's coronavirus cases.
Oh, shit.
Yeah, just the employees at that plant. So they had to shut down to stop from spreading it. But then you also have to look at the disruptions all along the supply chain because, I mean, if fewer people are shopping, which I don't know if they are, but if they are, that's a problem. This was just a food processing plant, too. So, like, their suppliers are sending them livestock, and if those get disrupted, then they're screwed. One problem they had with processing pork was that they were slaughtering so many animals that they didn't have enough staff to cut them properly for distribution. So then they were just ending up with these piles of dead pigs. That's wasteful. And they ended up donating 40 million servings of protein, which came out to like $30 million worth of pig that they're just donating because the supply chain is so broken.
Donating where? I
don't know, just grocery stores and shit. I didn't read the details, but I mean it's cool that they're doing that, but it's also pretty dire.
Yeah,
if they're willing to give away $30 million worth of pork in one day, just because they don't know what to do with it.
Right.
That's not good.
Okay, and then the post office.
I don't
Is it
know,
the same
man.
thing
I
that
don't
the
know.
workers are just catching it?
I don't know.
Oh,
I didn't check, but
okay.
This is the thing is I was anticipating the post office would actually fare fairly well, given its what I was thinking of is how foundational it is to the country, and it's I think it was one of the first major infrastructure services. It's a symbol, you know, rain and wind and snow and all that. Like the post office is known for being reliable. We talk a lot of shit about the post office in the States, but realistically, it's a pretty amazing service that they do.
Who talks shit about the post office?
I mean, I think everybody periodically will joke about mail being
like what?
slow and unreliable. I don't know. I mean, packages being lost or whatever. Honestly, I think they do a fucking great job, considering how many things they deliver.
It seems fine to me.
Yeah.
I mean, I hear people talk about, there's the joke that postal workers are suicidal.
Sure.
Or they snap and go postal.
Right. That's a thing. Yeah. But anyway.
Our postman always seems very friendly.
Yeah, I mean, I've had some asshole postal workers, but I mean, there's assholes in any field. By and large, I've been impressed with the post office. But the point is that I was thinking, like, surely we'll keep the post office afloat, considering it's a national service. It's foundational, symbolic, historical, and is one of the backbones of society. But, you know, once again, I was underestimating Trump because I don't think he cares about all that. You know, I think if the post office isn't sucking his dick at any given moment and complimenting his quaff, then he's not going to help at all.
Yeah.
If it doesn't profit him or stroke his ego, then he doesn't seem to have much interest. And you know, this may change as well. This could be one of those things where he's just playing hardball, and maybe, you know, he could actually be right. Like, maybe they don't need as much help as they're asking for. It could be one of those situations. But, I mean, it seems like they're on the verge of one article I read said they're on the verge of losing 630,000 jobs, which is a lot of jobs. And it's the mail. So that's two big hits to infrastructure if that happens. You know, 500,000 jobs and the ability to deliver mail and packages. Like, that's some serious shit.
Right.
So, and then there was you sent me that article from Vice where they're trying to reach unemployment offices. They called the unemployment offices in 50 states and reached 2 of them. Yeah. Sounds about right. And just today, I've seen other people posting the same thing, just posting stories about not being able to reach unemployment. That one isn't as surprising, but it's still concerning. But the thing is, so like, there's all this shit happening, and I haven't even bothered checking on water and electricity outages in like a week or two, and those were my primary concern originally. But I had to just take a step back because it was overwhelming at a certain point, you know, because all the signs I was anticipating of collapse, those were all happening, and you kind of lose perspective after a while because, like, am I just in the rabbit hole? You know, am I imagining things at this point? Like, maybe those signs are there, but they don't represent any large-scale systemic problems. And to be fair, my opinion from the beginning has been that I don't know what's going to happen, but I think it's fairly likely that we could be looking at complete collapse within a couple of years. And if that's fairly likely, then I think we need to act as if it's going to happen and prevent it. And then if it doesn't happen, great. Maybe we saved it. Maybe we didn't. Doesn't matter. Yeah. You know, that's just how I feel. Things aren't looking too good.
Right. It's not.
But it could be a temporary blip. other than the people that have died and lost their jobs and retirements and that kind of permanent shit.
Yeah.
It could be that the supply chain evens out, the post office is okay, people start killing pigs again,
Okay, so what about World War III?
Yeah, that'd be shitty.
Yeah, so you mentioned that this could result in World War III. So walk me through that. How would that happen?
Yeah, so my logic there was I was thinking when this pandemic struck, I started thinking it feels like this could cause like the end of civilization as we know it. But then I checked myself and tried to figure out, well, how exactly could a pandemic cause that, And so I kind of went backwards, and I was thinking, well, what would a World War III look like? And it would mean, potentially a war on U.S. soil, or even if not on U.S. soil, like how would it happen? And I think that if the United States were significantly reduced and weakened, then our enemies, whether active or sort of simmering passive enemies like Russia, would be in a position to strike either technologically or physically. And so I started thinking, okay, well, what could cause us to be in such a dire position that we were vulnerable to our enemies, or at least that they would think that. And from there, I mean, it seems like really civil unrest and like an internal civil war, a second civil war could do that. But even without that, just basic unrest and lack of our existing infrastructure and weakened morale, things like disruptions to utilities that are persistent and or major.
Yeah, but aren't they dealing with the same problems we are?
Yes and no. I actually have no idea how... Did we just lose video?
Did I forget to start it? Ah, shit, I did.
Oh.
Whoops.
No, I thought I checked and it was...
Whoops.
Maybe not.
Well...
Anyway, so you guys get half a video. You missed all my posing at the beginning. Sorry about that. Anyway, I don't know how other countries are doing. First of all, like Russia, do you know how many cases they have? Has anybody heard anything about Russia at this point?
I don't know, but...
Yeah, I'm sure there's some information out there. How accurate it is anybody's guess. But also, countries aren't the same from one to the next. One of our listeners was pointing out in our comments that my concerns about the power grid aren't valid because we can just look at what's happened to European power grids. And that's not really the case because every system is a bit different. And also, my concerns based largely on secondary or tertiary threats that haven't occurred that are unpredictable, like a hurricane or a cyber attack, which they have not faced. Secondarily to that, also in particular talking about the power grid, Italy, for example, had some unique scenarios that they were facing because of the emphasis on wind and solar energy in Europe that we don't have in the States, which I won't get into all the technical details, but it's logistically a different challenge. But then there's also cultural differences, geographic differences. Most of our citizens are concentrated in specific locations in the States, and I don't know how prevalent that is in other places, but it's a huge land area, to govern. Mm-hmm. And if we were to reach something resembling martial law, what that would actually mean is lots of lawlessness and some places on lockdown.
Why would it mean lots of lawlessness?
Because you can't police everybody in the States. There's not enough military. So then it's a matter of organizing militias with your neighbors and hopefully forming something resembling a representative democracy. Hope you don't get assassinated for your can of beans.
Yeah.
And, probably that's not going to happen. But I think the chance is greater now than it ever has been. And that's why it's worth paying attention to.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say.
So, I mean, but to try to get more specific to your question, how could this lead to World War III? So if we started having large-scale infrastructure outages, and when I say, like, utilities, I mean specifically power and water, but also internet, pretty quickly people get desperate. And it really depends on the circumstances, because in a small scale, that kind of desperation and desperate circumstances can lead to cohesion. Like I talked about in Florida with the last hurricane I experienced, people banded together. Certainly there was some spike in crime and looting and criminal activity of various sorts, but mostly people were very helpful towards each other and supportive. And that's great, and that could happen. But that was also a pretty small area. That was a couple 100,000 people affected, not all of whom were without electricity for several weeks, as I was. And it's also the rural South, so it's a little different than New York City suddenly losing power and meat or something.
Right.
You know?
Well, yeah, I think when society or when humanity or groups of people or whatever you want to say, if they're all faced with the same problem like this, then if disaster hits or something like that, like people, their first inclination is to be altruistic and to help one another.
Most of them, yeah.
Yeah, vast majority, like generally. But I think that changes when resources become very clearly scarce. And that's when it switches. And if you're choosing between your life and someone else's, you're not going to be as generous.
Right. And then yeah, like in the Florida case, like we were not... People did die from the storm and probably from complications afterward, electrocution from down power lines, that kind of thing. But nobody starved to death. And a lot of that's because the military showed up and were able to distribute combat rations to us. So, granted, it took hours to get over to the next town, which was usually a 25-minute drive, because everybody was so desperate to get combat rations. And, you know, that's not a good situation, but it went fine. But that's not going to be the case when you're talking, I mean, New York City's, I think, 8 million people. You're not going to show up and hand out enough MREs, you know, combat rations to support that population. And if you did, I mean... So anyway, riots and looting would be pretty quick to go down. And then from there, I mean, I don't think it takes a lot of imagination to just kind of think through, like, could that get worse when it starts? And obviously, yes. And if it ever led to something like a second Civil War or World War III or even just a general martial law state, I think it would take a couple of years. I think it would start within the next couple months and progress for a year and a half, 2 years, maybe 3 before we were over the edge.
The war in Iraq was pretty quick.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, this is like my biggest concern for all this. First of all, I don't think that the pandemic response plans that I've seen so far, I don't have all the details, but I'm not completely confident in them. I'm also not, I don't completely lack confidence in them because I don't know enough about them. They're not exactly public. But I do know that even the people that are experts in these pandemic response plans are pointing out that those are made for pandemics and they're meant to be temporary. And they're not made for pandemic plus, you know, earthquake or pandemic plus hurricane. And just like one bad hurricane season, I mean... God,
that would be so bad.
Yeah.
We have a overdue earthquake here in the Northwest.
Yep.
And in California, too. They're on the Cascadia fault line.
Yeah, or let's say that something else happens unrelated to the pandemic that sparks another overseas conflict, and suddenly the military's stretched thin again. Then, I mean, we're much more vulnerable, and that even then, the prospect of the military showing up to distribute combat rations in the middle of a full-scale war is a lot less likely.
Yeah.
Granted, you still have National Guard and all that, but I mean, the system basically just isn't... It's not built to tolerate every set of circumstances, and that's kind of just the big picture concept. And how likely it is that we'll end up in some kind of chain reaction of layered circumstances that lead to major societal degradation, I have no idea. I don't know, but it seems not terribly unlikely. But again, really, my concern is just like what can we do to prevent that? Or to recover as quickly as possible. And that's a big question when you don't have, like, when you're not a public pundit, you don't have a billions of dollars of cash laying around, you don't have a tech infrastructure to wield, you know. It's hard to solve that problem.
Yeah. Let's talk about anxiety.
Okay.
So we have a few listeners that have commented that we seem pretty anxious about all this. And... physiologically, we both talked about this, and we, what are you doing?
Showing off the JRE mug.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry, showing off the JRE mug.
That's the Joe Rogan mug I got for being on his show. Unfortunately, it's, like, peeling a bit. But
womp, womp.
Anyways, yeah, we've talked about this, and physiologically, we actually don't feel anxious.
No, I'm slightly happier than I used to be.
And I've read articles about this. There's been a couple floating around and people talking about how actually...
it's your heart that's been traumatized, right?
Oh, God. Well, no, not that. We could talk about that, too. But that a lot of people, especially people who normally suffer from anxiety, don't feel anxious all this. And one of the theories I've seen is that because now there's a reason, a legitimate reason to be anxious.
It's like validation.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, you were right to feel like the world was ending every day. Because maybe it is, you know?
Yeah, my friend Kim was talking about the guns we bought, and she was like, I think everything's going to be fine, and I don't think you and Kevin need to get guns, but if it helps, alleviate your anxiety, then, that's fine. And I was like, actually, we don't feel anxious. And she's like, wait a minute. You are predicting the end of society, the collapse of civilization, maybe a World War III. You have a bunch of guns. You're talking about setting up militias, and you don't feel anxious?
Nah.
I'm like, no, I feel fine. I've been very content in quarantine. But you've been like kind of going, like you said, going down rabbit holes of like looking for the KPIs and all that. And I haven't as much. I'm just hearing it through you. And all you're saying makes sense to me. So I can see how this can all happen. Just making up words. Oh,
we should keep that one. I like it.
It's kind of cool. Yeah.
We'll have to define it later.
Okay. Yeah, it's like a domino effect that I could totally see how one thing can lead to another and it could be really disastrous. But I think for me, it's just, it also still seems very abstract.
Sure.
So even though I understand it logically, it's not something I'm like actually feeling.
Yeah, and for me, like I just learned, something I mentioned in previous episodes, is I just learned last year that apparently I have a dissociative anxiety disorder that I've had for a very long time, starting with a couple different episodes of PTSD that were not diagnosed at the time, starting in childhood through teenage years. And so I've had this weird, like, complex, pseudo-dissociated anxiety management philosophy in a way, which is interesting. I can go into more detail about that later. But even with that, like, I'm conscious of it now, and thinking about it too much can actually cause anxiety, because then I start to, like, remove cognitive defenses and coping strategies, and then I start feeling anxious. But in this case, there's not been an increase in anxiety, at least not consciously. And what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to periodically look at myself as a different person, which is a Stoic exercise, and several other branches of philosophy have similar exercises. But the goal is just to kind of look at yourself and see, all right, if I were to assess myself from the outside, am I being anxious? Am I acting anxiously? Am I thinking clearly? Do I sound like a crazy person? If so, am I a crazy person? And so I've been conscious of that kind of stuff. But even then, it's not like worrying me. You know, I have had more dreams of people dying in the last week.
Yeah, you had a dream last night that I died.
Yeah. You and my friend Sabrina, and a couple weeks ago, another friend of mine's spouse died in a dream, and I would expect that those are probably anxiety dreams, but
yeah, it sounds like it.
But they didn't even bother me like a lot of bad dreams do. You know, like you have bad dreams sometimes that like affect you when you wake up, and like they stick with you, and you still. Oh, really? You haven't had those? God, those are terrible.
You seem to have pretty horrific dreams. I just have I either dream about things that are really mundane, like if I have a test tomorrow, I'll dream about having a test.
Yeah.
You know, or just weird random stuff where I'm just like, I don't know, Kimiko can fly.
Oh, that's great. That's a good one. Kimiko can fly. Yeah, I have pretty crazy dreams, and a lot of them are like really cool. Like I have crazy sci-fi dreams that are really elaborate. Like I've invented things in dreams before, complete with names. One of them was an underwater single person, like a submarine boat thing with a tail fin. It was called a moor tiller. It was based on the design of a tadpole, which is interesting.
That's
anyway,
cool.
Yeah, I've had a lot of really elaborate stuff like that. One was a full movie plot. It was like X-Men meets Terminator. Mm-hmm. It was dorky as hell, but it was a legit plot. It was really interesting. Anyway, but I very rarely I'll have one that's like severely disturbing, and when I wake up, like it's still with me, and it feels like really gross and horrible. I had one last year because I thought I had liver cancer. There were some tests I was having done that were suspicious. And it looks like I don't have liver cancer, so that's good. But yeah, I had some horrible dreams around that time about having to commit suicide so as to prevent my friends and family from suffering and watching me die.
Jesus.
Yeah, it was elaborate. And it wasn't just that simple either. There were monsters in it too. So,
naturally.
yeah. And like I went to the underworld and it was just a corpse processing factory with no lights. Mm-hmm. Anyway, moving on.
God, you're such a bummer.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But
no
you
one
can
wants
see
to hear
why
us
I'm
talk
probably
about
not real, like, end of the world. All right.
We'll see what happens.
Yeah. Get some more guns.
One of our listeners asked us if he thought that concern for this pandemic was generational. He suspected that millennials like us and maybe Gen Zers, Zoomers, are taking it more seriously than boomers are, even though boomers are the most vulnerable in terms of getting sick and dying. Have you noticed that?
I haven't noticed that. I could see maybe some logical support for it since I think boomers grew up during the Cold War, and it was just a normal part of their childhood to do things like nuclear bomb drills where they'd hide under their desks and get away from windows at school just in case we were nuked by Russia. So, you know, growing up like that with a constant threat like that of global destruction might temper them better for... They're just like, it's a pandemic.
Do you think that's kind of like a boy who cried wolf sort of thing because it never happened?
Oh, so they're less concerned than they should be, maybe.
Yeah.
It could be, or it could be that they're appropriately concerned, you know, and just doing the actual, like, following sanitary guidelines and staying safe,
right,
without freaking out over it.
Yeah, I don't know if I've noticed a generational difference. I mean, for instance, everything I learned about how big of a deal this is have been from boomers. So like Sam Harris and the people he interviewed and Joe Rogan and the guy he interviewed, like those were all boomers. So,
I guess so. Is he might be right on the cusp.
Who?
Harris.
Oh yeah, he might be more Gen
Harris
X,
and Rogan.
True.
Yeah.
I don't know what the cutoff is.
Yeah, I think Gen X.
I always forget about Gen X.
Yeah. Yeah.
The forgotten generation.
Yeah, I don't even know what generation I am. I saw one article that said I'm a millennial I'm on the cusp. I was born in 1984. And one article said that's the cutoff.
I think you're an elder millennial.
But before that article I read 3 years ago, I just didn't have a generation. Like, what was I, you know? I wasn't X. What was after X? Was there something after X? Y?
Boomers.
No, the boomers were before. So, like, what?
Oh, after. Well, I think millennials were called Gen Y a little bit, but didn't catch on as much as millennials did.
Weird.
I mean, Gen Z
always
didn't
been a
have a name
millennial.
for a while either, you know?
Yeah.
It's kind of like when
They're
they
just-
turn 25-ish and then they're like, oh, there's this group of people, so we should
They're
call
just
them something.
What's the next one going to be? A? Because they're just going down the alphabet at this point. X, Y, Z.
Oh, yeah,
That
they
must
are,
be
aren't
where
they?
it comes from. So the next, they're just going to start over. It's Generation A.
Maybe. That's a good point.
They'll go by Alpha, though, because it sounds cooler.
Yeah.
And then we'll get to make fun of them.
Someone made the point that Zoomer was like some sort of like foresight because there's a generation of kids that are getting their education from Zoom.
Yeah. Zoom is a meeting software, collaborative online meeting thing that gained a lot of popularity recently. I haven't personally done a lot of research, but I did see some tweets by David Heinemeier Hansen, creator of the Ruby on Rails framework and co-founder of Basecamp, who was pointing to some sources saying basically that Zoom is malware, and they're using essentially hacker techniques to gain root access to people's operating systems during the installation process in really underhanded ways and doing some other shady shit. And apparently they're not end-to-end encrypted like they claim they are, and admitted to it, which is interesting. So everybody should kind of beware of Zoom. Sounds like a pretty suspicious operation.
Wait, so it's malware?
Essentially malware. Depends on how you look at it, really. I mean, I don't think I've seen any reports that they were like sneaking in viruses or anything. But malware meaning bad software.
Oh, okay.
Like they're using shady tactics and lies to trick people.
They probably never expected to get this big,
Yeah, probably not.
you know?
It's also occurred to me that it might be a CIA operation, you know?
I feel like it came out of nowhere.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
I had never heard of it until this pandemic, and then all of a sudden everyone's using Zoom. I
In
was
like
what happened?
one day.
Yeah, it's like, what happened to Google Hangouts and Skype? And
Yeah.
like, what's wrong with those? I don't know.
Suspicious.
It's a little odd. Wait, so you think it's a CIA operation?
Yeah, that's what I think. I think it's the CIA.
Go on.
That's all.
Oh.
They're
That's all you
spying on us.
got.
Yeah. I mean, it could be. It's probably not. I don't actually have any reason to think that one is. The CIA does some weird shit, though. Did you ever hear about the false flag operation they were planning when Kennedy was president? Operation Northwoods.
No.
So, I think it was the CIA and the Joint Chiefs had signed off on this plan. God, I really can't remember all the details. I think it was about Cuba or Russia. I don't know. But it was a plan to create an actual false flag operation where they would simulate an attack on American citizens, kill a bunch of American citizens in the process, and then use it as an excuse to go to war. And it made it all the way to Kennedy's desk, and he vetoed it. But that really says a lot, you know? It's really a credit to the conspiracy theorists out there pointing out shit like that, because that was a legit conspiracy. And we've had plenty of things like that. But, you know, some people have also said that it's awfully suspicious that Kennedy was assassinated a year later, less than a year later, after vetoing a false flag operation put together by the Joint Chiefs and CIA. I'm not saying Kennedy was killed by the CIA, but there are people who say that. I think it was probably Oswald. I think Oswald probably acted alone.
You don't think there was a second shooter?
No.
Cool,
No,
man.
I don't.
Hey, I heard this interesting A girl question. Let's talk about that.
Okay.
So she was talking about, the poll was, all right. First of all, it asked, she was one of those two-parter polls where you answer one question and the other. So the first part of the question was, have you ever had experienced cluster headaches? Have you?
Oh, I forget what that means.
I do too, but I
like
know
a
I
migraine?
haven't. Probably.
I've had migraines.
Okay.
Only a couple.
And then I haven't. I get somewhat of a headache if I have a hangover, but I've never experienced what people describe when they talk about migraines, which sounds pretty awful. And then the second part is, if you could push a button, making it so no one else will be born who will then experience cluster headaches, and the people who are already alive, who are already born that experience cluster headaches, will still live, would you push that button? Did that make sense?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, it seems like an obvious question. Like, yes, what's the downside?
Well, it's kind of creepy. You're not technically killing anyone, but you're undoing people.
Oh, I thought it just meant nobody would be born with cluster headaches. It means like, what, like you're just aborting everyone who would have had cluster headaches? Or just you're magically taking away cluster headaches from those people?
I took it as like the people who would have been born with cluster headaches would not be born.
Oh, well, no, I wouldn't push that button.
Oh.
I thought it meant just it would magically take away cluster headaches.
Well, then it's an obvious question.
It's
why would you
fairly
not
obvious.
do it?
Well, because I don't know what they are or if they have some evolutionary benefit.
Right. What are the unintended consequences of that?
Yeah. But I mean, you know, that's a lot easier than to say yes versus like, no, you're just aborting everybody who's going to have cluster headaches later in life. No.
Well, it's not
That's not
abortion.
cool.
It would be like they'd never even be conceived.
Yeah, still not cool. It's
Yeah.
it's just like super abortion.
Super abortion.
Yeah. Cluster headache or migraines are confusing. And I studied them a lot when I started having them. And I worked at a research institute that had one of the world's foremost headache experts on staff. And I used to try to engage him in conversation about headaches, and he didn't really care. I had to copy his CV once, his resume, and it was like 36 pages of citations just about articles he had written on headaches. Like 36 pages of single line citations listing articles he had written about headaches. That's like, I don't know, 1,000 articles on headaches. The man knew headaches, apparently. But anyway, they're mysterious and they're odd. And some people think migraines are a type of seizure. You can actually have migraines that don't hurt, which is interesting. Painless migraines. I've had.
So what makes them migraines?
Yeah, I don't know. It's all real confusing, man. I've had auras with some of my migraines, which are also common with seizures, where you have a sensory signal that you have an upcoming migraine or seizure. In my case, it's called a central scotoma. That's phase 1, and it's a negative scotoma, which means it's a blind spot it's not like a black dot, which would be a positive scotoma. It's negative in the sense that I don't know it's there until I notice that I can't see something that I should be able to see. Oh. So I'll be reading, and suddenly I can't read. I can't make out what words mean and it's really weird because I'm looking at the words and I know that they're there, and I'm not seeing anything obscuring it, but I can't figure out what the letters are.
So you can visually see them though.
No, that's the thing. Is the way to think of it is like, imagine your field of vision is like a globe, and then you just like pinch part of the globe.
Okay.
So it pulls, like, there's no hole, but you're still not seeing everything that's supposed to be on the globe, but you can't tell something's missing until you realize you can't make sense of what you're looking at.
Oh, interesting. So does it warp things around it?
I don't know, really. So that might not be a good analogy with the pinching. But the first time, or one of the first times it happens, I started testing it. I got home. I was driving, almost wrecked.
That's good.
Yeah. Well, it happened at work at the end of my shift. So I was just like, well, I'll go home since I can't read.
Since I'm blind.
Clearly. Well, I didn't know
drive.
I had a blind spot. That's the thing. I just thought something wrong with my ability to read. So I was driving, and then I was merging onto the highway, and because of my blind spot, it had started in the middle and started moving to the side, and because of it, I couldn't see a car that was merging at the same time.
Oh fuck.
Yeah, so I almost hit this car, and then I was like, okay, well, that's weird, and I guess this blind spot now that I know I have is moving. So then I got home and started testing it. I would stare at a spot on the counter and just put different objects on the counter and like look at different parts of it to see what I couldn't see peripherally, and that's how I figured out it was moving. So it would move to the side, reset, move to the side, and then I would get a scintillating scotoma, which was like a half-moon crescent checker patterned strobe light, which was crazy, and then that would turn into a migraine.
Wow.
Yeah, it's pretty trippy. It's weird shit.
So how often does that happen?
It's happened 3 times in 10 years. Yeah.
So if that happened again, you know that's coming.
Yeah, it just happened last August for the first time in 10 years, actually.
Oh.
Yeah, it was weird. I didn't get the scotoma, though. So what I did is I noticed the blind spot.
Wait.
Sorry, I got the central scotoma, but not the scintillating one.
Wait, so it happened for the first time in 10 years in August?
Yeah.
So
it happened twice 10 years ago within a couple weeks.
Okay.
And then 10 years later, which was
Gotcha.
last August, it happened again. Yeah, so I went 10 years without having it.
Interesting.
But I saw it coming this time, so I immediately took like ibuprofen, CBD oil, red strain kratom, analgesic kratom, probably a gummy or something, and
Wow.
took some stimulants and coffee because ironically those actually help prevent migraines often, and stopped it. So that was good.
Nice. Squashed it.
Yeah, I just fucking stuffed my face with narcotics. It's like, whatever, just give me all the things. No, there was actually a method to it. Like alcohol would have been bad because some theories are pretty well supported that suggest that migraines are blood vessels flaring open, and alcohol's a vasodilator and caffeine's a constrictor, so it helps to keep them closed. The end by me.
I just remember we'd put a pin in a conversation and then it didn't go back to it.
Oh.
We could talk about heart trauma.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Not really, though. So going back to the pandemic, since you guys, I'm sure, want to talk more about it, I've been hearing a lot of people talk about how this is traumatizing to society, which I guess in a way, like the way it's going to affect us. And
Yeah, to society it is.
Yeah.
And to some individuals.
like I saw something to the effect of, so a lot of people are, even though they're home and they have all this free time, aren't very productive. I know I relate to that. Like I've been just kind of getting back to work and that sort of thing. But the first couple weeks, I was just like pretty lazy and feeling very unproductive. And it seemed to be a common thing amongst like just based off what I heard my friends talking about and people on Twitter talking about. And someone made a post saying that the reason for that is we are experiencing a type of trauma. And so we're shutting down. And just going back to the fact that like you and I don't feel anxious about this, I also don't feel traumatized about it either.
No.
And that's just an individual level. That's not to say what anyone else is experiencing. I'm sure a lot of people are really stressed out about it and that sort of thing. But it brings up the topic of like, I'm so sick of people like watering down trauma like that.
Yeah.
Like we're, Peter Boghossian like made a tweet saying that like, we're kind of raising kids to be weak by telling them they're traumatized all the time when they're not.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I don't know, it bugs me. Like there's so many things like that that's like we're not using these words correctly.
Yeah, I think things are getting watered down, and I think it's largely because of luxury, privilege. Really, I mean, when people aren't threatened by real threats, they still have the innate biological tendency to identify threats, and so they just kind of make them up and then amplify them to fit with what they're anticipating. Things like tiger attacks, for example. That's something that we're biologically programmed to look out for and respond to. And when it's not there, people will kind of fill in the blanks. And I mean, I'll also say to the defense of the other side of this, a lot of trauma is unconscious. You know, like I was just talking about how I had PTSD several times without knowing it. I mean, I was certainly conscious that I was traumatized at the time, but I didn't know those words or what would happen next or how it would manifest in a personality disorder 10 years later, that kind of thing. But a lot of trauma is dissociative, you know, whether that's shock in some cases or derealization, depersonalization, surrealization. There's various ways that the mind can detach from reality as a way of coping, because some things you can't feel the stress of them with your mind intact. So there is a case to be made that some stressors and traumas can hit you without you knowing it. But I think that it is a mistake to apply that broadly. Yeah. Because not everybody is being traumatized right now.
Yeah, I think this line of thinking is why people say, you know, words are violence.
Yeah.
And it's not.
Yeah, it's the same kind, right? Words are not violence.
No, violence
they
is
can
violence.
hurt your feelings.
Right.
But to anybody who's ever been punched in the face, there's a big difference between having your feelings hurt versus being punched.
Yeah.
That's violence, you know. And you know, certainly words can lead to violence.
Right.
But really, even that's a bit of a stretch, because it's ideas that lead to violence more than words or just biology. So, yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
So.
All right. Thanks everyone for listening.
We're not anxious.
We're not
traumatized.
Yeah. And I am going to wonder, I'm going to spend some time thinking about, like, am I anxious now that I'm talking about all this unconscious anxiety and
yeah, that's a good
such.
point.
But so far, I feel pretty good. I mean, I'm healthier than I've been in a while. I've been working out. I've been hardly smoking at all. I've made some effort to eat better. I'm sleeping pretty well. Nightmares aside.
What a bummer that is. Like, sleep is supposed to be nice and relaxing, and your brain is just playing you horror movies.
Yeah.
That's what you do it.
Yeah. This last one wasn't all that stressful, though. It was like just stressful enough that I would wake up sweating and then go back to sleep and wake up sweating again.
Ugh.
But people kept dying. But then eventually I was like, no, because actually in this dream, I'm not going to go into all the details, but it was Donald Trump was telling me that a couple friends of mine had died, and you were one of them. And and I was like, fuck, that's terrible. I didn't believe him, though, because he's Donald Trump. So I went through this bizarre structure we were in to try and find the bodies, and I couldn't. I couldn't even find the rooms. And I'm like, somebody's playing a ruse on me, a subterfuge. I don't believe this. So I called him out, and he wouldn't come and face me as his accuser. I was like yelling, Trump. It was very dramatic. But anyway, the point is, even in that fairly serious nightmare, I didn't buy into the bullshit. I didn't buy into that hype. Can't believe the man.
Speaking of Trump, I think we're probably going to get 4 more years of him.
I wouldn't be surprised. Yeah, because it looks like Biden is going to be the Democratic nominee.
Bernie sort of dropped out.
Yeah, I think he did drop out. There's some circuitous and what I think is bad information floating around suggesting that he's still a candidate, but I think it was actually just anachronistic quotes. Just the timeline was a little screwed up in some of the reporting, and people are getting confused. Technically, anyone's a candidate. Madonna and Mickey Mouse are often in the running for president every year, just from write-ins, because you can write in whoever you want. So, yeah, technically he's still a candidate. Hopefully he becomes the nominee. Doesn't seem likely, but then none of this last couple of years has seemed likely. So.
Yeah, I don't know how many states still have to vote for the primaries, but Oregon is one of them. We vote in May. I plan on voting for Bernie. I don't think it's going to do much good. But yeah, it looks like Biden is probably going to be the nominee.
Which means Trump could win easily.
Yeah, and we shouldn't assume people will know why we think that. So Biden is senile. Like, his brain is melting.
Seems like it, yeah.
Yeah, if you listen to him in interviews lately, he's incoherent. He's not making a lot of sense. And yeah, I think he's a really weak candidate. And I am flabbergasted that this is the best we can do on both sides.
Yeah.
These are two terrible candidates.
Yeah. Hopefully that doesn't reinforce the notion that this is the end of Western civilization.
Yeah, hopefully.
But maybe it does.
Yeah, and you made a good point the other day, which is like, if Biden is going senile, voting for him is kind of like a blind vote because we don't really know who is going to be in charge. So
Yeah.
it's like, it kind of comes, it turns into Trump or roll the dice.
Yeah, because the thing is, when you elect a president, usually you're electing his friends and associates and the cabinet he installs, and it's a group that you're electing, and you're really voting for a party platform in most cases. Trump is a little bit of an exception because he's a manipulative liar and nobody knows where he stands on anything because he's full of shit and his whims change like the breeze.
Well, he stands for Trump.
Yeah, that much we can be sure of. But yeah, so in some sense, you're always voting for the cabinet and the platform of the person that you're actually voting for. But in the case of Biden, if what we're seeing is what it appears to be in the sense that it's an actual senility and cognitive decline, then what we're kind of doing is, by voting for him, we're essentially voting for a coup. We're voting for just a vote of faith that whoever comes along with Biden will run the show adequately when he's relieved of office within a week because he can't say his own name anymore. And I don't like that precedent.
Yeah.
But I also don't like having Trump as president. And I do think whoever Biden brings along with him will at least be better than Trump. So if I find myself in the situation of essentially voting for a coup over Trump, that is what I will vote for.
Yeah, me
and
too.
that's fucked up. I don't like that. I don't like being put in that position.
So weird. I don't know anyone, not even like strangers on the internet, who like Biden. Like, I haven't seen it.
I saw one or two that supported Warren when she was still an option, and then Bernie.
Yeah.
And one or two that supported Yang when he was an option.
Yeah.
But I've not seen a single person I know supporting Biden.
No. Yeah, it's weird. Who are these people?
Yeah.
How'd this happen?
It's so confusing. And maybe we're just in a particular bubble and but I mean, I have a pretty broad cross-section of friends in my social media sphere. I mean, like, I know lots of Trump supporters and no Biden supporters.
Yeah.
So who's calling the shots, Like, what's...
I can't remember who said it, but someone said that it's just a bunch of normies who are like, oh, it's the Obama guy, sure. And
yeah,
that's his appeal.
Yeah, that might be true. Just appealing to, like, disengaged middle-aged white men, essentially, who don't want to think about socialism and...
Fucking white men.
Yeah. Goddamn whiteys. Ah. Yeah.
All right, should we wrap it up?
Yeah, I have so many more things that...
What?
I started thinking of all these different topics, and there's a lot to process currently. There's a lot of shit going on. But yeah, it's a good time to wrap.
Okay.
Before we embark on another thing. But hey, everybody, send us your questions, and I would personally like to hear a lot. I would like a lot to hear any thoughts on things like utility disruptions, end of the world, food chain disruptions, World War III, Civil War, martial law. If you have inside information, that's great. But even just thoughts on it. Several people have already shared their thoughts, and I appreciate that. So please do more of that.
Yes.
So that we can prevent the end of the world.
Yeah, and sorry about the video, guys. That was my bad.
Women.
I'll do better next time.
That's what I get for trusting a vagina owner with a piece of electronic equipment. Anyway.
On that note.
All right, I just had to say that. I was dead serious, though. I mean it. All right. Thanks, everyone, for... I don't mean it. It was a joke. Uh-huh. Okay. And, yeah, get at us at standardpodcast.com and standardpodcast on Twitter. Okay, bye.
All right, bye.